Please help me welcome our speaker, Dan Richards. Dan is the VP of Professional Services at Interactive Advantage. Thank you for being here, Dan. The session is all yours, sir.
Well, thank you, Casey, for arranging this and for having me. And thank you to eLearning for having me as well. And thanks to all of you who are in attendance. I see some of you out there who may have seen this presentation out at DevLearn in Las Vegas. And so hopefully I've added one or two spicy things to it since then. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, thank you so much for taking the time and taking a look at it. So let me go ahead and get my screen sharing, and I'm going to make sure I share with sound because we're going to have the pleasure of being joined by a screen reader technology today that will read some information to us as we go. So that'll be fun and entertaining for everybody. Okay, you should be able to see my presentation screen now, and you should be able to see the captions are running. So I have to be very careful to not drop any inappropriate words because the chat will pick it up. So let's go ahead and get going. So this is me. I work for an organization called Interactive Advantage Corporation. Along with the services that I work on and that we do that are mainly related to training production. I do a lot of work with DHS certified trusted testers. These are people with a lot of deep expertise in accessibility. And we consult with organizations on their accessibility strategies. We create strategic and tactical documentation in support of those strategies. And we create accessibility conformance reports from VPAT templates. We create accessibility statements and other documents that enable legal and marketing efforts related to accessibility as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. And our organization's been at this for 27 years. As a learning consultancy, we do a lot of strategic consulting in the world of training, learning, serving federal, state, local, and commercial entities for all those many years. So we're going to, before we really get started with the main part of our presentation today, we're going to lay some foundations for ARIA and what it is, because really this is not an advanced session. This is for people who are new to the concept of what ARIA is in the world of accessibility. What it can do for us, how we can leverage it to extend and expand what Lectora is capable of for us, and just be aware of its existence and what it can do for accessibility. So we're going to learn all about it, including how to pronounce it. You hear me saying the word ARIA, so I'm already giving away at least my preference, but we will learn a little bit more about how to pronounce it or how other people pronounce it. So what is ARIA? It stands for something. It's an acronym. Some of you may already know, or you can look it up on the internet in about 5 seconds. So I'll go ahead and reveal it. It's accessible, rich internet applications. And the important part of that is rich, right? Because we want to be able to create content that's very media rich, very interactive, that these experiences are strong, but they're also in alignment with accessibility standards. So ARIA, what it is a set of HTML attributes, things you can add into the already existing HTML that is the framework of our e-learning courses. And that those attributes provide additional information about HTML elements that are on the page, things you can see, things you can't see. It does that through defining roles and states and properties that assistive technologies like screen readers can pick up on and announce for us. Some examples of these kind of elements that can have special ARIA markups or tags, if you will, include images, forms, buttons, lists, navigation elements, and more customized things like sliders, tabs, modal dialog boxes, things that you create that maybe escape the normal description of what might, someone might think of as an interactive. They may not know, or you may not know exactly how to describe it, but ARIA can help in that area. So with that in mind, let's launch our first poll. I want to learn from you guys, how do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce ARIA? And there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just curious as to how you would pronounce it out there. And I see the poll has been launched. Thanks, Casey. So let's see how you guys, I've got some phonetic spellings here that you can try to select the one that best represents your pronunciation. And I have a music background, and so when I saw the word aria, I immediately thought about music. There's a musical form called aria, and I thought, well, that's how to pronounce it, but it obviously has a different origination, so others may talk about it differently. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people use the third one. Aria is what it is. Some people, well, we've got a mix, don't we? Aria is one I hear a lot. Those of you who know Cheryl Coggins of ELB Learning, she pronounces it Aria. Area is another one that I'm seeing, which is interesting. So yeah, we're all over the map, and that's cool. The important thing is that we know what it can do for us, and what exactly it is. So we'll dig into that a little more deeply. So let's continue on. So first, a very brief history of ARIA. Back in the early 2000s, if you wanted an interactive website, you probably built it in Flash, right? A lot of us might remember Flash, and it was a great way to create really sexy, interesting, highly customized web content. A lot of the e-learning authoring tools at the time would output to Flash, you creating websites in Flash. And over time, they started adding accessibility features to Flash until eventually Flash was kind of terminated or sunset for a variety of reasons, which left us with HTML5, right? That was sort of the big thing that replaced Flash, and it was supposed to be a pure and modern HTML. And the idea is that unfortunately, it didn't really support a lot of complex interactivity, and it didn't really incorporate a lot of support for accessibility at that time. So there were some challenges that needed to be overcome. So the folks at W3C, that's World Wide Web Consortium, they came up with the ARIA project to create a standardized markup for HTML that would add interactivity, especially when interactivity was involved. So web content with that interactivity. So in, again, the sort of 2006, 2007, we got our first drafts. They started talking about different roles and basic elements that we could use to improve HTML. And then when we got into the teens, we started seeing more specific support for common types of interactions that might go up, that we might build into our web content, including e-learning. And then as we got further and further along, this became more and more standardized and harmonized with HTML standards that were also put out there by W3C. And you may know that they also put out the WCAG standards as well, same organization. So these things are all meant to kind of work together. And that brings us to kind of where we are right now, which is we're on version 1.2. It's pretty strong. There's a lot that's making our content stronger even now in Lectora, even if you're not aware of it. It's already being used. And they are working on version 1.3 now, and we'll see over time. That may release in the next year. But you can see their releases are kind of far apart as far as major version updates. So we'll see what the future holds in the world of ARIA and its evolving history. So now we're going to do our second quick poll question. And what I'm looking for is where you fall on the spectrum, if you will, of familiarity with ARIA. Yeah, have you never heard of it before? This is one of your first times hearing about it. You're not quite sure, and maybe you weren't quite sure how to pronounce it and what it stood for and how to use it. Or maybe you have used it, you're aware of it, and you take advantage of it regularly. Or maybe you have a thing or two to teach me today, which would be great. So let's see where we each stand on our familiarity. All right. Okay. Again, a pretty good mix. So some of you are one of you at least is pretty advanced. And most of us have at least heard of it, and you're a little bit familiar, so that's good. So we'll try to grow on that familiarity as we go through our presentation today. So what I want to talk about next with ARIA is some of how it actually would look in the HTML. What do we have, and what can it do for us? And you see things like ARIA label. That's an interesting one, because if you think about what we do in Lectora to label things like images, we have alt text, right? An alternative text that describes what an image would look like. And an ARIA label is kind of similar, but goes a little further, and it, again, is more applicable to interactive elements, as we'll see in just a moment. Another one that we're going to talk about today a lot is the ARIA Live feature. And it's a really important one that enables us to do some interesting treatments in Lectora. When you see ARIA hidden, that's another way of making sure, and again, Lectora uses some of these to make sure that something is hidden from screen readers, so that it's not announced. And so we have a lot more control over how those assistive technologies will announce and make our content available to people. So these are some of the ones that are really important. And this list, I'm sure, will keep growing over time as new technologies and new ways of thinking about web content continue to evolve. So here's an example of the first one that I mentioned, the ARIA label, and how, you know, in the world of HTML, this is what it would look like if I had set up, let's say, a basic alt tag or alt text on an image. You can see that at the top there, the alt text. And when people confuse that and they say alt tag or alt text, really they're kind of the same thing, right? The alt tag is the actual tag in the HTML. And then the text, of course, is the text that would be announced by the screen reader. The ARIA label, as you can see, is a little bit more applicable to, in this case, an interactive element, a close button, or whatever the interactive element might be. And again, we don't have to think about this too much in the world of Lectora, because it's doing most of this for us. And there's not a lot of responsibility on us. It's more of an awareness so that we can take advantage of it, knowing that it's there. And we'll look at ways we can do that. Again, as I promised, the ARIA Live is a really critical one that we're going to be looking at a functional example today that you may be able to take advantage of, and maybe already are, while creating interactivity that's fully accessible. You can see how it a region of content can be declared as a live region. That is, that something is going on in that area of content on the screen, even after the screen was initially rendered, right? So the screen loads, the screen reader might be reading down what's present, and then something new might show up as a result of interaction. And in the world of ARIA, you see the ARIA Live attribute there. And this one is labeled or has a value of polite. Well, there are several values that ARIA Live can have. You know, it can be off, so just so that it's not announced at all, or it won't be brought into focus so that a screen reader can announce it. It can have polite, which means the screen reader will be guided to it immediately when it becomes visible on the screen, whatever that element is that's becoming visible. You have assertive, that means it would even override some other important things that might be announced by the screen reader at the time. So we can really sort of make it stand out and force that screen reader to go there to that new content. And then there's another one that's being depreciated, I think is the word, that was called rude. Literally, there was a value called rude, and it would sort of override everything and announce whatever content was going to show up on the screen. So that's kind of interesting. But just a little bit more on how attributes can define roles and why that's important to us. You can see here a couple of common simple interactions that you might include in an e-learning course, like a button. And this is where ARIA might be used to declare that that is a button, that it's not a link, it's not an image, it's not a drop-down list, it's or a slider, it's a button. So the user has a little bit more information to go on as far as what the element is that's interactive. And then you can see here states is another role where you can define, hey, it's an expanded state, or it's a not expanded state of a drop-down list, so that the user knows exactly what the condition or state is of an interactive element that might be on the screen. So that's particularly helpful. And you can see how that would really enhance the experience for somebody using our courses. So now that we're done with some of the foundational stuff, let's dig in and see how Lectora is actually using ARIA, um, and how we might be able to take advantage of that. So first of all, in Lectora, and you can see my screenshot of Lectora here, you're familiar with the alt tag, and it's actually an empty alt tag checkbox here that you would apply to images, right? So let's focus on the alt tag concept for just a minute as we transition more into about labeling. So just remember that the checkbox may work in the opposite that you're thinking. So you check the box to make it empty. So you, in a sense, check it to turn off the tag, and you would uncheck it to turn on the tag. And of course, what it does is it reads the name of the object as you've defined it in Lectora, and that's what will be announced to a screen reader. But this is almost exclusively for images, shapes that are maybe turned into images, and different types of image attributes that you might have, or image elements that you might have in your project. Now, this is what it looks like inside of the HTML. Let's say you uncheck it, so you turn it on, which means you're going to have an alt tag with alt text. And there you go. You can actually see inside of a course that there's the actual alt text that would be announced. So that's what an alt tag actually looks like in the HTML, which is kind of cool. And you can also see, similarly, when you don't have alt text defined. Now, there is still an alt tag that exists there, but it's empty. There's no value there. So most screen readers will say, oh, okay, I don't have any alt text to announce, so I'm not going to announce anything. But some screen readers will, depending on the settings that the user chooses. And this is an important thing to remember, that our users can use those third-party assistive technologies and set them up with their own preferences, their own settings, that may make them announce things in a more verbose way. That is, it's announcing things that even maybe it shouldn't, or that it's going deeper into the announcements of what it's actually announcing. So we have to kind of be aware that there's some variety, and some of that may be under our control and some of it may not. So that brings us to one particular screen reader that some people think of as kind of an overachiever in some ways. If you're using the sort of stock functionality of the NVDA free screen reader, you may hear the word blank announced on occasion in your Lectora courses. And I'm going to see if I can let you see and hear what that sounds like. So let me jump to my Lectora course. I'm going to launch. There we go. And I'm going to activate NVDA.
Welcome. Okay.
So I just wanted to stop there. Can you all let me know if you're able to hear that? Casey, you might have to unmute.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, cool. Well, it sounds as good as NVDA can anyway, right?
Right.
Google Chrome, one running window, accessible dynamic hide/show. Heading level 2 accept blank.
Aha. So when I tab to an image, and there actually is an image that's kind of behind the top bar there, it was announced, even though it does indeed have an empty alt tag.
Lectora.
I'll kind of show
Stay
you
at
what
web
that looks
T
like.
support stay
But
ahead of the curve.
first,
Start window. Meet now and stay
exiting NVIDIA. Okay, cool. So there we are. So there is a logo image at that location, and it does indeed have an empty alt tag, but you could hear how it was kind of being announced by that screen reader as it was working overtime to make sure that it announced everything, even stuff that we had an empty alt tag. So if you get learners out there in the field who are using your courses and they're saying, I keep on hearing the word blank, this could be the reason. There could be other reasons too, but this is a common one. And so what I've done is I've provided for you guys a solution that may work for some of you. What you see on your screen here is a little snippet of JavaScript. And the idea is that you can add this into a certain place in your published output in Lectora, and it will seek out situations where items have an alt tag, but there's nothing in the alt tag, no alt text, and it will apply an ARIA hidden attribute to it. So that's pretty neat. We're actually going the extra mile here and using ARIA to our advantage. So it just so happens that if you're using Lectora Desktop, this is pretty easily supported. You could literally just take this text that you see in bold, and we'll make sure you get a copy of this presentation, of course, but you could always just type it out if you wanted to. Anyway, where you would place that, I'm going to switch over and show you. If you're using Lectora Desktop, here's where I've gone into my C drive. I'll just do the path. I go into my C drive, I go into Program Files, x86, I find eLearning Brothers, I find Lectora 21, I go to Support Files, and one of the things in there is the file that's referenced here. I'll just switch back quickly. It's telling us that it wants us to find this trivantus-image.js file and find row 437. So the idea is if you do this after you publish, you obviously wouldn't go to this location, but you could find this file after you publish in your published output, in your SCORM package or whatever you're publishing. You could find it and make this change then. But what I'm showing you here is how you can change it once. And then whenever this file is duplicated and placed into your published package, it will automatically have this fix applied. That way, every project you ever publish could have this fix if you wanted to use this solution. So anyway, yeah, so I would go in and I'll show you where I've opened up mine. So here's what that Trivantus-image file looks like. And if you go all the way down to row 437, you'll see that it actually does have some similar code where it's using an ARIA label, ARIA hidden attribute already. But what we found is that that seems to be for certain types of images that are being targeted. So what we have provided, this next line, you can see I've already pasted in as the very next line here, is a little bit more aggressive, perhaps you could say, a little bit more comprehensive. It's looking for anything that has an alt tag but no alt text, and it will do the job by adding that same attribute. If you're going to do this, I recommend saving a copy of the original JS file and changing its name to something like original trivantus-image.js, and then you can have this one called trivantus-image.js, and it will be the one that gets copied and used each time you publish.
Hey,
So,
Dan, we had a quick question. Christopher
okay.
had a question about the empty alt tag. Could it also equate to null or decorative content? Is that correct?
So that's possible. I've heard people, and in fact, I think when we discovered this and came up with this solution, we tried a few things. Like we tried putting in two double quotes. We tried putting in the word null. We tried a couple different things and found that it didn't work the way we might expect. Now, there may be other ways to do it. Maybe we weren't implementing that correctly. But we found that this as a little bit more of a global solution worked really well for us in what we were trying to achieve. So so this is the way we went about it. But that's a good question, and I think that would be worth exploring a little further. I wish I could remember the details of what we explored back then, because this was probably a year or a year and a half ago that we came up with this. And it's also possible that, you know, there have been Lectora updates since then that may change some of this, but at least this seems to be working for us now. Thanks for the question. Okay, so back to our workflow here, where we're seeing how we can strengthen and reinforce what Lectora is already doing by using ARIA attributes. let's get into our next area and talk about how we can take advantage of it and be aware of it and how Lectora is using it in interactive elements. So firstly, I'm going to show you a quick example, but as we look at it, I want to think about certain standards that are out there, because, you know, part of this presentation was that things are changing, right? Things are always evolving in the world of accessibility. Not only do we have, you know, here in the US, WCAG is obviously important because it largely drives and aligns with Section 508 being the requirement for federal government work. And then recently, just in the summer of last year, we had ADA Title II finally become an active rule that requires all state and local government entities to comply with WCAG. At the time, it was WCAG 2.1, and the language did specify, or later would be fine as well. So, but at least WCAG 2.1, which is also what Section 508 is aligned with. So effectively, state and local had to become as compliant as federal with everything that they were putting out, just like federal. So PDFs, PowerPoints, Word documents, e-learning courses, multimedia stuff, websites, all of that is going to have to comply. And there are some timelines for state and local where they have to get into compliance starting in April of 2026. So less than 1 year now from now. Some of them will have to already be compliant with ADA Title II. So with all of these different standards and even some international ones, how do we make sure that what we're about to do is okay? So to that end, I'm going to show you my interaction because I want you to be comfortable with what we're talking about, because there is something special about this interaction that I've got on the screen here. Notice that there are some interesting instructions. We go a little further than just simply asking the question here. We go so far as to provide some pretty explicit instructions. You know, you select an answer, you select the submit button, and then you're going to see feedback about your response. And that's important. And we want to keep in mind these instructions as we use the interaction and then look at those standards. So I'm going to use my keyboard, and I can see that just by pressing tab, I can move through. Shift tab will take me backwards through the interactive elements. Once I'm in the radio buttons, I can use my arrow keys to make selections. I can tab out of that mutually exclusive radio button group to the submit, press enter to trigger. And now I've got brand new content that shows on the screen. Now, without torturing you again with NVDA, well, yes, let's enjoy the torture. Let's get the torture going. We'll listen to NVDA one more time because it'll be kind of fun to hear what announces this.
Well, okay. Stay ahead of the curve. Star C, Lectora, ready. Lectora, Chrome Legacy window, heading level 2, blank, grouping with, select your ARIA live, radio button not checked, ARIA mysterious. Clickable submit button, which ARIA ARIA mysterious clickable submit button. I'm sorry, that is not correct. The ARIA attribute used in a dynamic hide/show interaction is ARIA live. Lectora assigns the stay ahead, Adobe, and stay, and exit, okay.
There we go, I've exited it. But you could hear how it
I think we've lost audio, Dan. Dan, can you hear me? Dan, we've lost audio for you for some reason. And I don't think you can hear me. Hold on, guys. Dan, we lost your audio. I think you're aware now. After your last screen share. Okay. He's working on it, y'all.
Okay, let's try that. Can you all hear me now?
Yay! Yes.
I'm so sorry. Thank you to my coworker who came in and let me know I had a problem there. Well, I was just saying some brilliant things, and you guys are just going to have to trust me that that's what was happening. But let me get myself reconfigured here, and we will pick back up and make sure I cover what I was covering. Where did y'all lose me? What did I just mentioned? If anybody can let me know.
It was right after you did the last demo of the NVDA. What's the guy? What's our friend's name? Right
Yeah,
after that.
EDA. Okay. All right. Let me get there. I'm not going to share with that sound turned on. Hopefully that will help. Okay. So what we saw, and maybe you heard, was again, as soon as this feedback was became visible on the screen reader immediately now announced it. It essentially brought a version of focus to that text and announced it immediately. If we changed our answer and the incorrect feedback showed, it would do the same thing. So again, what I was showing you is through the inspection tool in Chrome, we were able to see that indeed that text area is set up as an ARIA live off value. So this is probably what I was saying and pointing at when you guys couldn't hear me. But indeed, it's off to begin with so that it's not being announced when it's initially hidden. And then later on, much further down, you can see there's another area of content that's declared as an ARIA live area with a polite value, meaning that it will be announced by screen readers in most cases, unless there's something else really important that the screen reader is announcing at the time. And you can see that text right here. So in a sense, Lectora kind of has it covered in both ways, one for its initially hidden state and one for when it becomes available again, visible again, it becomes announced. So that's pretty neat stuff to know that that's happening. And, what does this mean for us in the world of Lectora and interactivity and accessibility? Well, for a long time, a lot of people thought, well, you really can't do this kind of interactivity in e-learning tools, or at least in Lectora. Some other tools may have allowed for something to be happening there in different ways, but in Lectora, how could you make sure that the screen reader was going to announce this thing, this new content on the screen? Well, back in the day, we used to use the scroll to action. Some of you may be familiar with that, where you kind of have to reload the page at the moment the user interacts, and as the page is reloading, you sort of scroll to or set the focus to a specific element on the screen, which actually causes the screen reader to announce that element. But I don't know at the time that it was necessarily using ARIA to do that. And so it's really wonderful that at some point, I can't remember when, Lectora added this feature so that things that are initially hidden and then become visible via actions, have this ARIA live polite attribute already baked in. You don't have to do anything as a developer to make that happen, which is wonderful. But that brings us back to, well, what are our responsibilities? Because, we could do this kind of thing with a lot of different types of interactions. We could cause things to show on the screen in very creative and interesting ways as the user interacts, right? But in our PowerPoint, if I can get that activated again, there we are. We have a few possible areas of WCAG that we really need to focus on to make sure we're not violating any standards. So let's kind of take a look at some of those specific items that we might, potentially violate, that we certainly don't want to violate. So let me bring up my list separately here so I can see it. Okay, the first one in the list was 2.1.1, which has to do with keyboard accessibility. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this is just the page, one of the pages on W3 website that lists WCAG 2.2 guidelines. And what you can do on the left-hand side here is actually drill down into specific success criteria or standards, however you want to refer to them. And the first one that may be applicable here is 2.1.1, which has to do with keyboard navigation. And you can see right here, it's all about making sure that the student can indeed navigate this interaction via the keyboard alone, and there aren't any traps there that they're able to get around with their keyboard. So what we saw is, yep, sure enough, that is supported. In fact, the very next one is no keyboard traps. So both of these really are applicable. And I demonstrated that we're able to navigate that with keyboard alone. You don't have to use a mouse. So we should be okay on that one. The next one is 2.2.1, which is the timing being adjustable. Now, I put this one in there because if depending on how you think of this, there are changes that are occurring on the screen. They're not necessarily timed. In fact, they really aren't timed. It requires the student to interact, but there's a context here, I think, that's important for us, which is to make the student aware that something's about to happen. And the same is true if you do have something that's timed. It's important to alert them to that so there are no surprises, then give them the option to adjust and extend and other things, which of course in this case we wouldn't need. So I don't think we're really in any violation here. The next one we'd have to be careful of is 2.4.3, which deals with focus order. And what we're saying there is we want things to be in a logical sequence. So as I was pressing tab or the arrow keys and moving through the elements on that page, they were in a logical sequence that made sense. And that makes that also goes for the feedback text that's going to pop up in the middle of that interaction. It has to be in the right order so that when it appears and the student uses an arrow key to go on to whatever's next, that it makes sense that it's going on to a logical next item in the sequence. So this definitely applies, and we just need to be careful in the way we set it up and the way we test it, namely using layering properly on the page in Lectora to make sure that things are in the right logical focus order. Another one is 3.2.2 on input. And this is really well stated here. If you look at this first description, it's saying, if anything causes a change of context or changes something. Now, I don't know that there's really a change of context in this case because we're not changing the way something functions when we interact. We're just making new content available. But if we're really being careful here, really being conservative and making sure that we're not breaking any accessibility guideline, then we'd want to consider this and make sure that indeed we're not surprising them. We're not changing the context of anything when this content becomes available on the screen. And then lastly, 4.1.3 status messages. And again, we're using HTML markup, roles and properties, make sure that text field becomes available to the screen reader. It's using the live region technology to make it available, and then it is announced it's receiving focus, so we can see that it's, you know, should not cause a problem with this particular success criteria. So I wanted to just go on from here, and you know, we viewed it, the dynamic stuff shows, and I've explained all of that. This is what it looks like. We saw that a minute ago. This might be easier to see now, where it uses the polite attribute. But let's poke holes in this. I'd love to get your thoughts. You know, since some of you on the call here may have a little bit more experience with accessibility and with ARIA in particular, is there anything in particular that you think may be a violation here? Is there anything that we should be aware of? I guess we'll take questions or chats. And I hope to goodness my audio is still working.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good. So no one's got any thoughts about poking holes in it. So that's good. And you know, I've shown this to folks before at different organizations, and you know, have strong opinions about accessibility. And remember, some aspects of accessibility are somewhat subjective, right? We can't predict what everybody's going to think or feel about the way certain things are set up, and you do have to be a little bit careful to know your audience and know how they're going to respond to things like this. And just because we can do a thing doesn't mean that we always should do a thing if it introduces some complexity or confusion into the mix for our learners. So these are some rationale, I guess you could say, about why I think it's probably workable. So that brings us to sort of the beginning of the end for us here in this discussion about ARIA today. The big thing that I hope you take away from this conversation is awareness that ARIA exists. It's existed for quite a long time. It's continuing to evolve as a technology that helps us to strengthen what we're able to do in our web content to make it more interactive and more accessible at the same time. And I think that's really powerful. And again, that Lectora is taking advantage of it and is automating use of ARIA in most cases for us as well. And I think that really sets Lectora apart, makes it a very strong authoring tool, and one that we continue to use and love for that reason. So I'll take any last questions anybody has at this time. And I may not be, okay, there's the question panel. And I see there are no open questions right now. So I'll take it that no one's got any questions. Oh, applicability to VR. That's a really interesting question, Claudia. That's one we've been looking at lately. You know, when you think about tools like Scenario VR that's put out by eLearning, you know, we were excited to hear that it's possible that on the long-term roadmap for that tool, that there may be some accessibility that would be introduced there, and it would likely be ARIA. So that's really exciting. So I see a message here. Casey, did you want to answer this question for us? Is that what the message means?
The Kristen's question about
Claudia's question about VR. There's just a message here saying you would like to answer this question live. Maybe that's a default feature of Zoom that I'm not aware of.
yeah, that's just me clicking that for you to answer.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I've done it. I've answered it live. But let me elaborate just a little bit more. You know, if you think about the challenges with VR, it's, you know, you've got so many potential things to interact with in this environment. But similarly, if you think about what you're interacting with, there's no reason that those elements can't be labeled with ARIA labels as buttons or whatever they happen to be in that virtual environment, and to be announceable by assistive technologies that could be brought to bear by any user. So I'm really optimistic that we can make virtual reality experiences, even complex ones, accessible using ARIA. Okay, I've got another question here. Is there a way to let users select auto start audio or don't auto start audio for accessibility on slide 1? Yeah, that's a great question. It's not specific to ARIA per se, but it is a really interesting one that I've looked at numerous times. And depending on which accessibility standard you're looking at, let's take for example WCAG. If you read very, very carefully, there is not necessarily a clear requirement that says you cannot use auto start on, let's say, a video that has audio in it. There may be a best practice or suggestions that you allow your users to begin to start that audio rather than auto starting it, because obviously we know that if a user enters the screen and they have a screen reader reading, announcing, that may conflict with our audio or video that might start up automatically. So generally speaking, we tend to avoid auto start just as a usability concern for everybody. But again, very strictly speaking, there isn't really, in my opinion, a clear requirement that says having auto start turned on would be a violation of some WCAG requirement. You'd have to do some real deep digging to double check that. And I'd love to have a conversation with you offline if you're interested. But yes, you can certainly provide a checkbox to your users or a button that allows them to set as a preference their ability to auto start the audio throughout the project, or videos as well, any media. And indeed, what it would do is set a variable to either let's say you set the auto start variable to either a 0 or a 1, 0 being that it doesn't auto start and 1 being that it does auto start. Then that's a preference that the user can set at the beginning. And then as they go through every page, you would have an action that checks that variable in a sense with a condition, an if condition. And if the condition, if the variable is equal to 1, then it would play the audio and essentially it would be an automatic start. Otherwise, it would not start. And again, you would probably need to provide a simple instruction to your users to go ahead and start that audio. Great question.
We had a couple more come through in the chat. Kristen was asking about Storyline and if it has the same support for ARIA as Lectora.
Yeah, as I was starting to dig into ARIA, I began looking at other tools to see if it's is using it, and yeah, a lot of them do use ARIA because it's common, and as I say, it's been around for a long time. I can't recall specifically what Storyline does with ARIA. I'd have to look more closely at it again. It's been a little while, but I think you could pretty much count on just about every situation where you're creating interactions, especially when you're hiding and showing things, that ARIA has to be involved in some way, or else it's simply not going to be accessible. You'd be introducing new content onto the screen with no warning and no mechanism to tell the screen reader that it's time to announce it. So that might be something that we could test for and let you know, but it's my assumption is that yes, it's probably being used.
And then Paul was wondering if there are other aspects of ARIA we should be looking for.
Well, earlier in the presentation, I listed out a number of roles and attributes. Could you be a little bit more specific about your question, Paul? Is there a certain context for your question? And what you mean by looking for? A little bit more info maybe, and I could try to address that a little bit easier.
Paul is typing feverishly.
Okay, good.
Imagine, I don't know, hopefully.
Okay, yeah, there was a screen a little earlier. I'll try to get back there without giving everybody a headache. I just listed out a number of attributes and things that are available. And what I mentioned at the time was, you know, this list will be no doubt expanded over time. Maybe with version 1.3, there will be more and you know, more of these ARIA roles and attributes to expand the capability of the technology and allow us to create even more exciting, interactive, and accessible content in the future. So I hope that addresses your question. You betcha. Okay.
Awesome. I think those are all the questions that we have right now. It looks that way. So thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for your time and your expertise. This was one of those nitty-gritty presentations. So really appreciate your knowledge, and we really appreciate our audience as well. Those good questions and their interaction with us for this webinar.